Hey folks, I'm Marcel back with The Pulse. I'm in Indiana this time, where my folks are this time of year. They're away for a couple hours, so I wanted to update you on a news story, a mainstream news story about our friend David Sinclair concerning the recent brouhaha over the NMN that's in his pet supplement. This article in the Wall Street Journal is really, it amounts to a more detailed depiction of Brad's video and has some more nuance and a little more balance to it. And I'm going to put a link in the description to the Wall Street Journal article, but keep in mind you do need to be subscribed to the Wall Street Journal in order to read it. So I'm going to cover a few main points here and seek it out if you're interested in getting more of the detail. But I want to focus on one major glaring omission that is really frustrating me. I'm holding it back a little bit, my frustration with the Wall Street Journal in this, because I just find it shocking that there is absolutely no mention of NMN, even though they talk about the pet story multiple times. They quote the scientists that were so upset about the selling, the name calling. They covered all of that without getting into the backstory. They don't mention NMN by name, and I find that really interesting, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But they don't mention the million people taking this. They don't mention the anecdotal success that people have had and dogs have had. And I think this being a publication where they do oftentimes interview people and try to get the whole story, I find it very curious that they avoided this part of the story. Interesting thing, they mention basically the story, but they never mention the citizen petition. They never mention the ban. They never mention NMN by name. They never mention Metro Biotech. All of this being such a huge story right now, the pending lawsuit against Metro Biotech and David Sinclair, you would think they would go after that. You would think that that would be low-hanging fruit for the people who are interested in going after David Sinclair and the media. Why did they avoid it? And I'll tell you why. I don't think you could go down that rabbit hole of mentioning the FDA and mentioning the complete story that really is occupying the public's interest when it comes to David Sinclair. For the most part, I think it's the biggest story occupying the public's interest, not just here, but elsewhere. As we've seen Andrew Huberman and others mention this story, I think NMN got flagged due to being on legit script, just as it's flagged, just as these videos are flagged. Every time I mention NMN, it's flagged. And they ran it through an algorithm, tested the story. My guess is, and this is my guess, but, I read it a couple times. I can't believe they avoided this entire story. Yet that story is what caused all of this brouhaha. Because it was NMN they were giving to the dogs, but they won't say that. It was NMN that's been given to people. It's been NMN that's been given to the mice and other model organisms, yeast, worms. There's a whole backstory here and of a lot of evidence and a lot of human clinical trial. Whether the data is conclusive or not is beside the point. There's a lot going on with NMN, and Wall Street Journal ignored it. And I think it's because of the FDA. And I think it's because of the database published by LegitScript. And Google is a member of it. And they didn't want to get suppressed by search. The Wall Street Journal didn't want their story. They ran it through a filter and they said, well, we're getting all these, messages, all these warnings. You can't put NMN on here. It's going to get flagged. It's going to get filtered. It's going to get suppressed. Just as we're all getting suppressed. Even the Wall Street Journal is avoiding the FDA's weapons, the way they're using it. So freedom of speech is suffering here. Freedom of information in a free press is suffering here. That's what the FDA is doing. That's what these algorithms are doing. That's what search is doing. That's what Google is doing. They're suppressing the free media, the free press, your freedom to access of information. They're suppressing this story. They don't want it to get out there because they want their stories to show up in search. Plain and simple. Just like I'd like for my videos to show up in search again. They're just not. They rarely are. In the United States, these stories are filtered, and Wall Street Journal is a U.S. publication. As I mentioned recently, it's the irony is you can find NMN on Amazon in pretty much all other countries. It's Amazon's effort to play games and to appease the regulators, which is what essentially Wall Street Journal is doing here. They're appeasing the FDA. So David Sinclair wins on a hit piece against him. He's ultimately winning. It's crazy. It's bizarre. I sometimes defend him. It's an uncomfortable situation. I was one of the first people going after him post-NMN. Yeah, he had some bad press before, years ago, but it was always old news. Everything the past few years has been positive in the media, on CBS, 60 Minutes. They've all posted positive stories about David Sinclair, and I was one of the first to go after him for this topic, pretty roughly. And he mentions not responding to social media critics, and I personally believe I'm probably one of them. And I think I'm not taking credit here, I'm just stating the timeline of what happened. But I find it interesting that they see a weakness. Now, the scientists that are going after Sinclair, they see smoke, and they're trying to make a fire. They see a moment of opportunity where Sinclair might be on the losing end of a major fight. And listen, this is going to impact grant money. Ultimately, this is potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of longevity grant money from the government and elsewhere. And so throwing him under the bus is self-preservation. Don't let him get any traction right now. Yet, this story and these scientists are doing him a big favor because the battle for NMN gets suppressed. And so what's the pharmaceutical company's role in all of this? Well, they set up the game for this filtering to take place. They fund the FDA, they fund Amazon, they fund Google, they fund efforts to push back on supplements, natural ingredients, and they're going to be the winners. And they fund these scientists who are all fighting over the grant money. I've never been one to promote or believe in conspiracies, and I don't really think this is a conspiracy. I think this is pretty straightforward. I don't think there's much doubt here. You get a story from the Wall Street Journal about David Sinclair. It's all about an NMN supplement, and they won't mention it. It'd be different if they didn't mention it, and it wasn't such a hot topic right now in the supplement industry, in the Sinclair universe. If it really wasn't the story that you're going to hear about when you hear about anything recent David Sinclair. Yet they avoid it. In a hit piece, they avoid the topics that we've been covering here and other people have been covering regarding his moves with Metro Biotech, and they don't even mention it. So the framework, the game, as the rules have been laid out, simply are set up to benefit the drug industry at all costs. And things that aren't in their best interest. Hey, if NMN was a drug right now, it'd be all over that story because it wouldn't be banned in that context. It'd be all over this story. They'd be promoting it left and right. But since it's a supplement, available freely, a natural ingredient that people are taking openly as a supplement, they can't talk about it. They won't talk about it. The other aspect of this story is the fact that he clarified what his quote was, what he approved for the press release. And that was that the effects of aging were reversed in dogs. When these scientists and the media mention reverse aging, they're right away making the leap to extending lifespan. They're equating age reversal with lifespan extension. And they say there's no proof that people are going to live longer. There's no proof that dogs are going to live longer. When that's not what's being said. What I'm saying, set dogs aside for a minute. I love dogs. And I do think that the last years of their own lives should not be spent suffering and slowing down ailing from arthritis and other conditions that dogs suffer from. And if some of these can be alleviated by a bit of NMN, I'm all for it. As they have been in me and thousands of others. Now, over 1 million people, but just this channel alone is somewhere between 10 and 15,000 now. And people are getting their symptoms of aging alleviated and reversed, if you will. Doesn't mean any of us are going to live longer. If we're all going to live to 85, 90, and that last 30 years is going to be spent suffering on a managed decline, if we can take some steps like taking NMN and feel better, we should have a right to do that. And if we want to give some to our dogs for the last 2, 3 years of their lives, we should have a right to do that without the ridicule and without confusing the story. The media, the competing scientists out there saying, oh, they're saying you're going to live longer. He's saying you're going to live longer. He's crazy. He's a snake oil salesman. Well, that's not what he's saying. That's not what I'm saying. Hey, maybe you will. Maybe you won't contract a disease at 70 and die at 71. Maybe. But that's going to be decades. It's going to be decades before we know for sure. In the meantime, the quality of our lives is improving. And yes, we can improve the quality of lives, it appears, based on the evidence, the anecdotal evidence, nonetheless. When people give these treats to their dogs, and the DoNotAge one, or whether it's the Sinclair one, the dogs are responding in a positive manner. And yeah, we should have a right to give it to them until we know more. As long as it's safe for us and for our pets, we should be able to give it to them. And we shouldn't convolute this story. We shouldn't try to make it about something it's not. We shouldn't suppress the story and leave out key components of the key ingredient driving the whole hit job on Sinclair. We shouldn't leave out it's a lie by omission. And we shouldn't discount the fact that people are just trying to have better quality of life. We're not trying to live forever. You're lying. They're lying. I'm talking about the media, and I'm talking about these competing scientists who are so up in arms. They're just lying about what the actual story is. They're lying about the things that I'm saying and others are saying about how we're feeling. And yeah, it's frustrating. It's annoying. I'll talk to you guys more very soon. I'll probably do one more video this week from my folks' place here. And thanks for watching, as always.